Hello, everyone. You all know me. I will explain builds in this video, as there are no up-to-date sources. When this game was released, Champions had a free concept of what builds were, but over the passage of time and updates to the game, powers changed, as did their usefulness. Over time, the freeness of what could be created while being able to complete content was diminished, and many of the old builds are now useless to the game's current state. Most, if not all, have not been updated in years. Today, I am coming to create this mini tutorial on how to build a DPS correctly. I am doing this for people who wish to play thematically and old players who are somewhat lost with the power changes. That is why I desired to create a mini summary guide of passives, forms, and their respective stat and specialization trees. I will not go into detail on the descriptions of the passives due to time constraints on the video, but I will summarize them so that anyone can create their own DPS build. With this mentioned, let us begin. First, I will explain what a threat wipe, also known as a wipe or TW, is. There are two kinds of wipes. The first and traditional kind, a single target, and the second type, the AoE. The single target threat wipe only affects one target, while the AoE affects any enemy within a range of vision. The difference between them in usage has to do with cooldown times. No matter the type, a threat wipe is mandatory for all DPS. That is why I list the different threat wipe powers in the game to choose from. Even if they are for utility purposes, a DPS can cause a lot of damage, which can steal the threat from a tank. When this happens, a DPS must wipe their threat quickly. It is important to note that it will most likely cause massive player deaths of DPS, healers, and even the tanks if this doesn't happen or the timing is wrong. This is why a threat wipe is mandatory. Now, let's talk about another essential skill, Resurgence. Resurgence is an active defense skill that is mandatory for all roles. It restores a great amount of health while offering a special type of resistance for 15 seconds. It has a cooldown of around 1 minute, but it is essential because it can save you if you are about to die. This is why an explanation of the powers is very important when making a freeform. I'm not going to talk about armor-piercing advantages or the best damage power sets, as I would prefer that you discover this for yourself and your builds. However, what I am going to do is give you the tools needed to create the builds yourself. In this, I leave you a tutorial. Important details are missing in the image above as they are directly related to the role of the DPS. It is important to state that you can't create a mixed DPS between melee and range. However, it is possible to have a melee DPS with 1 or 2 ranged powers, or a ranged DPS with a melee power that increases its other power's ability to function. Per se, a debuff. As stated in the image, the dexterity, dex, primary is a much weaker choice for melee or range and isn't recommended as the primary stat of any build. It is a weaker primary than strength, STR, and ego, granting fewer advantages than intelligence, int, which reduces enemies' defenses. It does make a tremendously solid secondary stat, though. One thing I have noticed confuses others is that with a martial arts build or dual blade, whose form scale with dex, is how to scale the damage without the primary being that particular stat. It is a good idea to go STR/dex, rec, recovery, for a build for those particular sets, and a lot of melee damage in general, with the exception of melee int builds, which should be full int. Now, I will talk more about statistics, otherwise known as stats. The most important thing to note is that each form has a linked stat. The idea is to increase the stat on your form to about 675 points, or about 25% damage per form stack. That will be the maximum DPS value you will have. Earlier, I talked about how, with dex-based melee builds, the idea was to go STR/dex, rec. The form of the tiger is the most common form for this type of build. This form scales with the stat of dex. As stated earlier, you must achieve 675 dex for maximum DPS. If your character doesn't have endgame gear yet, or you are a new player, I recommend going for rank 5, R5, and rank 6, R6, mods in your primary gear and purple secondaries that increase your form stat. You will want to have at least 500 points in your form stat to meet the requirements of in-game content. For example, if you use a form that scales with ego, you will only focus on ego when you are statting your gear. With this said, I will now move on to passive powers. Every passive increases one type or several types of damage. To continue with this example, An armor-piercing ability called No Quarter reduces an enemy's ability to resist fire and crushing damage. This debuff increases physical and elemental damage due to an enemy not being able to resist damage nearly as well as it did previously. Some damage penetration abilities only apply to one type of damage. This relates to passives, similar to the powers and abilities chosen to use in your build. These must complement each other for a good build and strong character. Passives need to increase the damage types you do, armor penetration needs to be an accessory of the damage types, and the powers need to work with both. This section describes the best points for each passive. For example, with Night Warrior, I would only recommend it for builds that have charge powers. It seems optimal as it increases all damage types equally. However, the damage is much lower than other passives, only going up to 85%. I will leave a link with all this information so you can make builds to your liking. For example, perhaps you would like to make a Superman-type build or something that fits more into your character's lore. Another thing to note is that as a DPS, your health should be less than 7k. Also, again, focus on the form stat of your character to gain more damage and an excellent ability to gain energy. To finish this video off, I feel I need to address the topic of gear. If you are already at level 40, you should know of Cosmics. Cosmics are raid bosses that reset every certain amount of hours. Players do Cosmic bosses daily to gain Silver and Gold Champion recognition, SCR and GCR. The most commonly done Cosmics by most players are Kigadalak, Higa, Huijibo, Ape, and Teleosaurus, Dino. If you can get a score above the minimum score, SCR and GCR will drop with the possibility of other rare and possibly useful rewards. But the main focus of these is to gain the currency to obtain gear. As a DPS, you should aim for the Justice gear set. You will need 400 SCR and 200 GCR, as well as 2 other types of tokens. To obtain the tokens, you will need to do a special type of alert raid called a rampage. There are 4 different rampages that each drop 1 item, but they are on a rotating schedule that changes the rampage to a different one every week. To find which rampage is available, look next to the minimap or click on the fist on the minimap and click on the Rampages tab. Rampages require a larger amount of players to queue for the alert to start, with a minimum of 8 and a maximum of 10. At the end of the mission/alert, there is a chance for these materials to drop. You will need 3 super dense diamonds, 2 petrified scales, 2 hypercooled ignimbrites, and 2 Destrium bearings. Now, I will describe the secondary gears, which should be interesting. The most common secondaries for meta DPS are OV secondaries. They have an extended farm but can be started from level 10 onwards, but can only be bought and used at level 40. To buy this gear, you need to farm villain tokens, which is the red currency. Hero tokens, the blue currency, are mostly used to obtain auras. I will explain the OV for a combo build in my next example. Before I do this, a few explanations are needed as to what a combo is. A combo is a power repeatedly used for a different effect. Most combos have 3 variations. You have to continuously click on the power repeatedly for maximum damage. Common combo examples are Blade Tempest and Bullet Ballet, which are AoEs. Generally, this type of build is used for melee DPS. The secondary used for combos is Medusa Onslaught. If you do not desire to farm OV, you can farm Cosmic Strike. Cosmic Strike increases critical and critical severity once it reaches 10 stacks. It is the best secondary for builds that do constant damage, such as Power Armor, PA. They can drop at Cosmics as well as the other secondaries of the set. As for those, Rage increases the secondary super stats, and Wrath increases the primary super stat. Rage is useful, for example, for a melee build that uses Dex, while Wrath is for something like Ego or Int. Well, that's all you can add. I hope you like this tutorial summary. I'm going to upload another video with this format. The next one will be about Healer, so take care.